بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome to the last class, this 4-part series of an Islamic psychological perspective on gaining better mental and emotional and spiritual health. Today, inshallah, I'm going to try to bring all the concepts that we've been learning into a way that, into a practical approach that we can take, towards gaining better mental, emotional, and spiritual health, inshallah. So far we've talked about the different psychological aspects to ourselves, our mind, our heart, our nafs. And just to review, we said that the only way that we can have true peace in our lives is if this heart, this spiritual heart of ours is in the lead, right? And we said that's the only way this orbit can be in harmony, right? And if anything else is in the lead, we're always going to be unstable. And everything that we have is a tool to serve that part of us that's meant to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we talked about how oftentimes we use our heart to serve our mind, and we live in a time where we worship our mind. And it's really the opposite. Everything that we gain, the tools that we gain, the knowledge that we learn is there to serve our heart, so that our heart can be fueled, so that that spiritual side of us, that true side of us can grow and improve and reach the potential that it was meant to reach. So today I'm going to be talking about each of those aspects and how we can fix certain things within those areas, the mind, the nafs, and the heart, in order for us to feel more stability in our lives. And the first step to anything is knowledge, right? It's having this awareness. So I hope that now at least we are aware of these entities that exist within us. We're aware that, there's our mind, there's our nafs, there's our heart, and there's all these aspects within us. Because sometimes when we look at ourselves as just a whole. We don't know what we're working with. But I hope that now when we look within, we know what we're looking at, that we have our mind, we have our nafs, we have our heart, and each of those have different functions. And we need to know how they should interact with each other for us to serve our purpose. So awareness is the first step, and knowledge leads to awareness. And as the mind opens up to this knowledge, I pray that we transfer this knowledge that we've learned into our hearts. Because until our hearts absorb what our mind has been absorbing, then that's the only way that we can see true change in our lives. So let's start with our mind. So our mind is a really powerful tool, and its function is to absorb the information that we get from the world, right, through our senses, our sense of sight, our sense of hearing, our sense of touch, and that's how we get information. We are exposed to the world, we gather information, our mind takes it, absorbs it, stores it, it processes it, and interprets it, right? I'm talking about our rational mind. That's really talking about our brain right now. It's the rational mind, it's the logical mind, it's the one that basically, it does a job, it has a function, right? And so that's where we have our thoughts. And when we gather information, we start to have a thought process. And these processes that happen in our mind have a huge effect on our emotions and our behavior and on our life. And so we have to constantly evaluate what are the thoughts that I'm having, what are the belief systems that I'm acquiring, because that's what your mind does. Your mind goes through experiences, right? And it's, like I said, it's a rational being, it's a logical being, it's constantly processing. So you go through an experience, you have a thought, you might feel an emotion, it associates that experience with that emotion, right? You start to have a belief system. This person did this to me, right? I felt inferior. Belief. That person, or thought, that person doesn't believe me. I mean, that person doesn't like me. I'm sorry. That person doesn't like me. And then you have a belief, right? That, oh, I'm not likable. That's a belief that you have. So I'm just giving a small example of how our mind works and how we gather. We're constantly developing these messages that we say to ourselves. We're constantly developing these belief systems that we go through life having, we don't even know that we have. But they affect our day-to-day behavior. They affect how we are in relationships. They affect how we are in our life, basically, in our day-to-day functions. So these belief systems, if they're not checked for flaws, because they can be flawed, right? Or for irrational patterns, then it can cause us a lot of agitation in our lives. And one of the ways that our mind can work against us is even within our struggles religiously. And so I wanted today to talk about certain religious struggles that we might have that can affect our psychological well-being. They did research on religion and psychology, and one thing they found is that when people have religious struggles, and I'm going to talk about what I mean by religious struggles in a little bit. When people have religious struggles, it can lead to people feeling depressed. It can lead to people feelings of low self-worth, and just the lack of psychological health. And I'm going to go over what they are, right? What types of religious struggles that we have. So the first one is in terms of our relationship with Allah. This is called the divine religious struggle, right? And this is our conflict in our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And again, it's our mind. It's the thoughts that we have about God, right? It's the thoughts and the opinion that we have about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are your thoughts, your belief systems. Now, as these might have been things we've acquired through upbringing, through our experiences, through maybe things that we were taught, misconceptions, misunderstandings. And we go through life with them. We go through life with these beliefs, and we never evaluate them. We never put them under the microscope, you know? And so, but they affect us, right? Because, you know, this is our Creator. And whether you believe it or not, it's going to affect your worship. And so, you know, we might have questions about His goodness. You know, we might have questions about His love for us, His power. And this is huge because there are people who are, you know, Muslim or who believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala but have not understood Him in an accurate light and are struggling with these conflicts within them. And the way we think of Allah is huge. And one of the best ways, one of the best reflections of this is the Hadith Qudsi, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I am what my servant thinks of me, right? That Allah will basically meet your expectation of Him, right? And this is beautiful. You want to talk about positive thinking? This is the epitome of having positive thinking. Is that if you believe Allah is merciful towards you, you truly believe it within the deepest, you know, hearts of hearts, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be merciful to you. If you truly believe that Allah will come through for you, Allah will come through for you. And there's a story I learned from a sheikh who told me that, I'm not sure of the source, but it's a beautiful story. It's about two men that were being thrown into hell. And Allah had commanded the angels to throw those two men into hell. And the two men are walking. One of them is walking, he's not looking back, and he's just walking. The other man, he's walking, but he keeps looking back. Keeps turning his shoulder, looking back, looking back. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told the angel to bring this man. You know, and he asked him, why do you keep looking back? He said, I did not really think you were going to throw me into hell. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, put this man to heaven for his good opinion of me. And we have to really believe these things, you know? Like, I mean, I know there's all these things out there. For example, The Secret. Have you guys ever heard of The Secret? It's about like positive thinking and the power of like positive thinking. If you think it will happen, it will. But we have these things in our deen where it's not even about the universe. With them, it's in terms of the universe. With this, it's the Creator of the universe says, I am what my servant thinks of me. But we don't see the power in that. You know, and everything in our deen is about how much you believe in it. When you make dua, it's about how much you really believe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will accept your dua. It's not just lip service. It's not just I made dua. Where's your heart? You know, does your heart really believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to accept your dua? And so this opinion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is really important. And sometimes we struggle, right? To have that good opinion. So we have to evaluate, do I really know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Where is the flaw in my understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And I need to check that. And best ways to start with that is understanding His attributes, right? Reading His words. And constantly striving to understand the things that we do not understand. How many times do we know we don't understand something, but we don't ask? And our deen always encourages asking. This is not just quiet and this is not just like be quiet and obey. Our deen's not like that. So it's really important to know that this, I'm going to talk about two other religious struggles, but this one is the most important. Because think of a child who walks around not thinking his parent loves him, right? Don't you think that child's going to struggle in life? If the person who was in trust, who's supposed to love them, the first person, right, supposed to love them unconditionally, they think that that parent doesn't love them. They think that parent doesn't care for them. Don't you think that child's going to have some struggles? Now imagine if you're going through this life not thinking or not knowing in the deepest of your hearts that your creator, the one who brought you from nothing into existence, doesn't love you. See, these are religious struggles that we don't talk about, but they affect our mental, emotional, and psychological well-being. Because this is our purpose, this is everything. I was zero before, and now I'm here in this earth. So to know that my Creator loves me, to know that my Creator has mercy towards me, to understand Him the way He wants us to understand Him, which is always through such love and compassion, to believe that in our hearts has a huge effect on our life. So this area is really huge, and this conflict, this particular one is really huge. The second type of religious struggle that people have it's called intrapsychic, which is basically it's questions and doubts about religious issues. Okay, so someone might have a trouble about believing in the afterlife, or believing in certain components of religious teachings, and it could be a conflict between a religious teaching that they know they should be following and maybe their own personal desires or their own personal human impulses or their nafs. And so for example, there are certain commands of worship and you don't understand them the right way, so you don't do them, right? Or you don't feel comfortable, or you don't believe in them, or you don't agree with them necessarily, so you don't seek out the knowledge to understand them, but just because they conflict with your own personal agenda or your own personal human desires, so you don't do them. This is a huge struggle because at the end it's a conflict that's within you. Just because something is hidden doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So this is another thing. And that's why, knowledge is so emphasized in our deen, because it opens doors. And when your mind is opening up, and it's fueling, because where does that knowledge go? It's going to fuel what? Your heart, right? That's your heart. Well, we said that the mind should be there to serve the heart, right? So it gets this knowledge to serve the heart, to support it, to make it grow. So we can't just do things we understand and not do things because we don't understand them. We have to seek to understand the things that don't make sense to us. And then the third struggle, and this one I know many, many people struggle with, is interpersonal. And this is what people around you, and what culture brings into the faith that causes a conflict. Okay? And I know many of us see this, right? Where people say, maybe culturally something's promoted, but it's like not Islamic. This is a conflict. And it causes people distress, especially if they're trying to because Islam doesn't put a burden on us. It's the things that we put into Islam that causes a burden, right? It could be my own thinking, my own personal wants. It could be the things that I am putting into my faith that is causing me a burden. It could be what culture is putting into the faith that is causing me a burden. And so this is why knowing yourself is so important, because how many thoughts do you have about yourself or your life that you think is Islamic but it isn't, right? How many times do we let culture pressure us or impose certain values or rules that Islam doesn't impose on us, right? So this type of religious struggle causes people a lot of mental and emotional agitation because, Islam on one hand, is promoting certain values, but they're meshing it with culture, and then they're thinking this is all Islam. They don't see culture anymore, they just see Islam, right? And this is a conflict. And, this causes people a lot of stress. And another example, sometimes people grow up seeing, say, quote-unquote religious person, right? Who is maybe hypocritical or a bad person, right? And so they have associated in their mind that that's religious, but that person's bad, and they made that association, right? So they might spend their whole life thinking that that's, because they haven't explored that, and that's their vision of what religious is, they don't want to be called religious. They don't want to even come close to being religious, right? Because that's what they've seen. That's how your thoughts can impact your understanding of your life, your religion, and how it can affect your psychological health. So, and that's, that's our mind is constantly making associations, and that's how important it is. That's why it's so important for us to regulate it and constantly be evaluating these beliefs that keep us from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and from maximizing the quality of life, our quality of life. So I wanted to mention these struggles when I was talking about the mind, because that's where you develop your thoughts, your belief systems, right? And then you live your life being guided by them, but a lot of them could be flawed, a lot of them could be not true, and most importantly, a lot of them are not Islamic, and we think they are, So it's really important. Research shows actually that the higher this religious struggle, they did a research study, they said that the higher any of these religious struggles are within a person, the higher the likelihood of poorer psychological health. And so the more that they're struggling within any of those three areas, they've linked it to emotional distress, poorer physical health, links to higher angered states, depressed moods, and sometimes for people, drug use, And this also goes back to because there's a gap there, there's like a gap of understanding between where I really am and where I should be. And so there's this feeling of inferiority, there's this feeling of not good enough, there's a lot of negative emotions that comes when things are not in harmony, right? When what you want to believe is not where you really are, so it's really important to seek that clarity. And this opens up the discussion of one thing I said a few classes ago about depression. I said depression is the gap between where you really are and the image that you've set for yourself, right? This is huge, and this is again under the category of the mind. We're talking about the mind right now. How many times do we set a belief system, like an image or an idea of where we think we should be? And we define it so specifically, and we equate it with perfection. We equate that image with happiness. We equate that with, that's the ideal place. That's where I will experience happiness. That's what we do. If I get that job, that's where I'll find happiness. If I, have that career, think of anything that you associate with, happiness or a good life. If my kids all become doctors, then that means I'll have a happy life. That's perfect for me. And the gap between that image and where we really are, the truthful state, right? That gap causes so much mental agitation, emotional agitation. Because one, you're narrowingly setting up a definition for happiness, right? And who are we to know what is good for us, number one, right? That's why it's important even when you make dua that you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give you what is khair, what is good, because you do not know what is good for you ultimately. And so when we attach ourselves to that image, we're in a different time and place, Because when you attach yourself to an image, are you really living with what you have? You're not. Because you're waiting to be happy. It's like you're waiting to be happy, really. You're waiting until that thing happens for you to be happy. But your present is not getting any attention when there's so many things in your present that you could be happy about. And, they say depression is associated with also, usually it's partially linked to being in the past, like you're constantly thinking about the past. And anxiety it's partially linked to you constantly thinking about the future. So when you are in any of those places, you're going to experience more mental, emotional agitation. But they found that when being in the present is what's linked to a good mental, a good state of mental health. And the truth is, it's because what is the future and what is the past? They're all illusions. They're not real, right? And so the present has so many things that are going on that you're neglecting. And when your mind is in a different place or time, is your heart going to be present? Because what fuels the heart, right? So what's supposed to be serving the heart? But the mind is not occupied with the heart right now. It doesn't want to serve the heart. Everything is serving the mind. I want to think about all the possible things I could do to get to that image. And I'm not saying to not have goals and to not plan and to not strive for higher quality of life or potential, things that you want. But when you attach yourself so strongly to an image to the point where you almost worship that image and you associate it in your mind with perfection, with happiness, then that's where you're limiting yourself. Because what Allah could give you could be even much better for you than this happiness you thought you were going to experience. Could bring you much more happiness than what and most importantly, you're neglecting your present. And so one of the best ways, when I think about our ummah, I think we said depression is partially linked to the past, right? It doesn't even have to be you're thinking about bad things in the past. Actually, depressed people, they'll tend to be in the past thinking about all the good things that happened in the past, right? Because their present isn't really giving them that many good things to experience maybe, or they're not focused on it, they're not seeing it. So, reliving all the good experiences in the past is giving them joy. I think of our ummah, right? And I think of how stagnant we are sometimes, well, a lot of times. And I think of, subhanAllah, what do we do often? We're always reminiscing about the times of the Sahaba, right? Which is good, right? We're not supposed to just reminisce. We're supposed to take it and try to apply it, right? But what are we doing? We're always saying, oh yeah, the height of Islamic civilization, the golden age of Islam. And remember that when it gave way to the Renaissance period and it helped Europe advance. And like we love talking about these things, but what are we doing in our present? And this is one thing we have to be aware of, like, all of these teachings of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam is not for us to reminisce. If they're not affecting your present, then they're not serving their purpose. And a lot of times we talk about all the good things about Islam and all the things that happened from Islam in the past, but I link the ummah's condition to I think they're presenting a depressive symptom because they're like, we as a ummah are in the past a little bit. So one of the best ways to stay present is gratitude. Gratitude is a great mental exercise because initially it's okay if you're not feeling the presence of your heart, but what you're doing is that when you start to be grateful, even to sit with yourself and to thank yourself, to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the things that you have, little or small. The fact that you woke up, start with that. The fact that you have your sight that day. The fact that you just can walk around healthy, can feel the earth under your feet, can see the sun, all these things that you take for granted. Start small, then go big, But what are you doing essentially is that you're giving the present its right. You're giving that day that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you, it's right. And your mind is in the here and now. It's not in the future, it's not in the past. Don't get me wrong, we all present symptoms of depression and anxiety at certain levels. But if we don't do this, it can become a disorder. And when things become a disorder, it's when we're not functional anymore, when we're so in the future and we're so in the past. Many of us have a healthy, we're sometimes in the future, sometimes in the past. The key is to be in the present the most, right? And subhanAllah, when you think of akhirah, right, it helps you even be in the present even more. Because what were the Sahaba doing? They would live their life as if they wouldn't even reach the evening. They would live their day as if they wouldn't reach the evening. And they would live their evening as if they wouldn't reach the day, right? Can you imagine their day? If that's how much attention that present moment is getting. See, when you think of akhirah, people think of it, oh, I don't want to think of that, it's depressive. No, that's your lifeline, Because when you think of akhirah, and you think of your destination, you want to maximize your present. It only makes your present come to light even more. And you start feeling the beauty of just being in the moment. I told you guys about mindfulness-based therapy one time. I told you how this is a psychological therapy approach that they derive from Buddhist teachings, right? This is because, a lot of Western researchers are now going into Eastern literature to try to see a more holistic approach and understanding of who we are. Mindfulness is all about being in the moment, being in the present. Do you know who they use for mindfulness a lot? Like Rumi. Rumi had such a love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you know, and everything that he said was linked back to that. Was linked back to his love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so he was all about being in the present, being in the moment, even with the pain. You know, there's a famous quote that says, the wound is where the light enters you. This pain that you hate so much, that's where you're going to find your cure, your healing, you know, the light, clarity. He talked a lot about, you know, looking at every day as like a guest house. Happiness comes in a little bit, pain comes in a little bit. Don't shut anything out, you know, because they're all there, part of the experience, trying to teach you something. And that's how we should be as Muslims, is when something, whether happy or good, happens to us, it's not about, you know, it's not necessarily about finding a solution right away. It's about the experience. It's about what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to teach you. And when you focus on the experience, you're focusing on being in the present, you're focusing on being in the moment. You know, it's not necessarily about, oh, I need to fix this right now. How many times do we go through something, if it's bad, if it doesn't feel right, if it's uncomfortable, painful, we just want to fix. Because we can't sit with the pain, we can't sit with the agitation. Parents do this a lot also with children. They come to them, they're not, you know, they're bored, oh here, take this, you know? Or I'm sad, okay here, do you want some cake? You know? Why can't we let them know that it's okay for them to figure out why they're sad, or sit with the pain a little bit? This teaches you emotional strength. This teaches you resilience, you know? Like, I always think of the pearl. And you know how pearls are made? When the clam gets an outside substance and it comes into the clam, it can't get rid of that substance. That agitation, it causes an agitation for the clam. And the clam cannot get rid of it because it embeds itself into the body of the clam. So the clam tries really hard, like, to get rid of it, so it can't. So you know what it does? It says, well, I can't get rid of it, so let me know how to deal with it. Let me see how I can cope with it. So it starts secreting this coating, this substance around this agitation, this particle from the sea, and it starts secreting, you know, a coating after coating after coating, and that's how we get pearls. If we look at our life similarly, this is exactly, it's about what am I learning through this experience? What is Allah trying to teach me through this experience? What milestone in my worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can I reach through this experience? It's about the experience. And that's the best way for you to have stability, because what are you doing in that moment? You're putting your definitions aside. You're putting your limited perspective aside. You're like an explorer, right? You're saying, okay, I have this situation in front of me, and what are you doing essentially? Is that you're involving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your exploration. Because healing cannot be true healing unless you involve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You can go to psychoanalysis for 10 years, and if you don't involve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the process, it's not going to be meaningful. It's not going to serve a purpose that can allow you to really take this heart and reach potentials. So, being present is really important, and this is one step. You know, this could be a whole other course that we could talk about how we can be present. But when it comes to your mind, always ask yourself, you know, am I being present? Am I giving my day its right? You know, and one of the best ways is our morning dhikr when we wake up in the morning, and our evening dhikr too. You know, because in the morning, what are you asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? You know, Allahumma as'aluka khayra ma fi hadha al-yawm wa khayra ma ba'dahu. Allah, give me the goodness in today. You know, you're in the day. We have so many like therapeutic components in our faith. I was reading the other day somebody who a colleague who's into like the Buddhist therapy, and she was talking about the therapy of chanting, you know, and how chanting like opens the heart. I was like, subhanAllah. It's just like, but if only we could own our faith, you know, and own it in such a way where we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not prescribe anything to us without wisdom, you know, without benefit for us. And sometimes we become so best word is stubborn, is I'll only do it if I see the benefit, right? But see, that's not what we're supposed to seek Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not the benefit. We're supposed to seek Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not the spiritual high, the bliss, right? The goal is always Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But when you make it about, and then the benefit is the gift that you get. But it's actually the experience of worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's the therapy. You know, they say that when you make dua, right? Allah already knows what you want to make dua for. But the dua, you making dua is for you. It's for the cleansing of your heart. You know, it's the practice of it. Last week we talked about the layers of the heart, and we talked about how the sadr is the outer layer, and this sadr, the breast, you know, this outer layer is called the light of practice. This is where you know, all the things that you do softens all the other layers of the heart. So even if you're not necessarily, those things that you're practicing are not going into your inner heart, they will eventually. Give it time. Be patient with your nafs as you were patient with it, as you built it up so much that it overpowered your heart. But be patient as you try to take it away from the center stage, you know. So with the mind, just to review, because I'm going to move on to the nafs now, but with the mind, it's important to constantly evaluate the thoughts that you're having about yourself, about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, about your faith, about your life, about your culture and how it's interfering with your faith. It's important to constantly be evaluating. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always, you know, always points out in the Quran the power of reflection. And sometimes he says for the mind to reflect, and sometimes he says for the heart to reflect. Because awareness is so crucial. We can't just be, you know, going through our life just constantly just absorbing and not ever reflecting on what is it that I'm doing. And you know what this does when you're doing this? You become less occupied with the creation. Because you have so much to work on. You have so much to do, and it's enjoyable. Because every step closer is a different, you're experiencing a different light. And remember how I said the layers of the heart, each of it has its own light? Each of it has its own, I guess, skill or ability that Allah's opening up. And as you keep working on your heart, Allah opens up more, like, the intellect within the heart. We said that Islamic psychology differentiates from Western psychology because intellect is not just limited to your brain. You know, the heart can perceive things. Allah opens up the intellect within your heart to perceive things that the mind cannot, is not equipped. You know, and so before I move on to the next, the last point is, remember that your mind is a tool, and that we live in a world where we worship logic, we worship the sign, you know, everything scientific, logical, rational. Do not worship your mind. It's a tool that's there to serve the heart. It's a servant. And just like Albert Einstein said, you know, we have this intuitive side and we have this rational side. The intuitive side is the gift, and this is the servant. But we worship the servant and we forget the gift. So remember that your mind is a tool that's there to serve your heart. And do not burden your mind with something that your mind is not equipped to handle. You know, it's like you're giving it a power that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not create for it to have. It's a servant. It's there to absorb information, process, and then fuel your heart. So now we're going to move on to our emotional side. So we talked a lot about, you know, having these negative emotional tendencies and how they can impact our life. So we talked about the nafs, and we said that when we're fueling our nafs more than our heart, then we're giving the control to our nafs, right? And so always the foundational principle for anything I'm saying is that we're supposed to be fueling our heart the most, right? That's the part of us that should be in the lead, okay? So now what if this nafs is in the lead, and how do we calm it down? How do we tame it down? How do we deal with it, right? So when we're struggling internally, when we're feeling emotional agitation, we need to ask ourselves, you know, just like I said when I was talking about the mind, be aware of your thoughts and your thinking patterns. Now we're talking about the nafs. Does my nafs need calming down right now? You know, does it need to be tamed? What does my nafs want in this moment? The nafs, this nefs of ours is it's an insecure part of ourselves, right? It's childlike. It isn't secure on its own. That's why the heart needs to be the king. It's the only one worthy of that leadership, right? The nefs, without the heart's influence, it's the nefs amara bisu, right? It's going to command you to do evil, right? It's going to command you to fulfill your desires. The nefs, all it wants is pleasure. It's a pleasure-seeking side of you. So I think of a child, right, who, when children, when they're agitated, when they're angry, who do they look for to soothe them? Their parents, right? And you know, what's wrong, what's going on, how can they basically like calm them down? And that's really the children look to their parents for that soothing quality. But you know, as they grow up, they're supposed to learn that on their own, right? To like regulate this nefs of theirs, because children, they're constantly like they're creatures, like they're just following whatever they want. You know, they want recognition, they want attention, they want candy, they want anything that's pleasure seeking, right? They want to do. And so the parent is there to regulate that. But we're supposed to develop the skills to learn how to soothe and regulate these emotions. And so that we're maturing and growing and we're able to function healthy in the world, right? Many of us are, I mean, if we don't do that, we're going to be like children, growing up children. And we see that, don't we see that a lot? I mean, adults who act like children, right? So, and the best way to gain this emotional strength is to be able to sit with your emotion and see and explore. We said we're explorers, right? We're not there to determine or to define if this experience is good or bad, right? We're there to see what this emotion wants. What is this experience telling me? When we feel anger, we feel jealousy, greed. Think of all these emotions, right? What does it want? What is this saying about me, or you know, what should I be learning from this? And what does my inner child, my nefs want? So this is compassion, because when you're sitting, you know, with the emotion, you're not being harsh. You're not shutting it away. You're just trying to understand it better. And I gave the example one time about, you know, a friend comes up to you and they're angry. You know, you don't just say, oh, you did something bad. You don't just say, oh, you're so bad, or you know, what are you doing there? You're putting their ego up. You're putting them on the defense. Will they ever listen to you? Will they ever calm down enough to see the truth of their experience? No, because you're focusing on them as a whole. But I said it's important to know the entities of ourselves so you know which part of you are you focusing on. When we say I, you know, or like I like this, or I love this, or I hate this, which part of you are you talking about? Your nefs hates that? Because what your nefs hates, your heart could want, right? Or, you know, which I are we talking about? So when we experience these emotional agitations, we need to sit with ourselves and see what it wants, just as you would with a child, just as we're supposed to do with a child. Like I said, sometimes, you know, it's hard sometimes for parents to see their children upset, so they want to soothe it right away. But actually, when you teach your child how to like sit with their pain a little bit or try to help explore it with them, you're teaching them a type of emotional intelligence and strength that they're gonna be able to do this better. This self-soothing that I'm going to talk about, they're going to be able to do this better as they get older. So you ask yourself, you know, in those highly emotional, agitated states, you ask yourself, you know, what does my nefs want? Does it want to satisfy does it want to satisfy its anger right now? You know, I want to go give that person a piece of my mind. Does it want recognition right now? Does it want acceptance? What does it want? Does it want approval? Does it need a little compassion right now? You know, you need to ask yourself, what is it that I need right now? And the next question is, what can I do to give my nefs, or to regulate this emotion in the right way? And this is the beginning of gaining strength and empowering yourself. When it comes to anything else, we empower ourselves, right? For example, we take preventative measures, right? So, well, I hope we do. I mean, for example, the way we eat, right? We try to eat healthy to prevent, you know, our body from getting sick. We put on the seatbelt. It's not because we know we're going to get into an accident, right? We take preventative measures. And same thing with the parents who, you know, your parents teach you how to walk, and, you know, they teach you these first like physical things that you're supposed to be doing, and So eventually you're able to do it on your own, right? Well, same thing with this, we have to empower ourselves. We can't always be expecting other people the creation to soothe us emotionally. We can learn how to give ourselves the things that we look to others to give us. And it doesn't mean we're going to be completely independent of other people, but we're going to be at least, I guess, less dependent on them in a more healthy way. Let's say that. So let's take an argument, for example. You just had an argument with a loved one, and they're mad at you, and it was just a bad argument. They think certain things about you, you think certain things about them. It's a really it's an argument that just leaves you afterwards. You all go your separate ways, and you're sitting there and you're feeling so agitated. You're feeling inadequate. You're feeling just in a highly agitated state. What's the first thing that we would hope we want to do? What's the right thing to do? We're supposed to say, okay, turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or make dua, right? That's what but why can't we do it in those times? Because our nafs is like so huge right now. And if we haven't been fueling our heart, in this moment, our nafs is going to be the one in control. See, sometimes we wait until things happen for us to say, okay, I need to fuel my heart, I need this heart to be the king now, I need this heart to be in control. But let's take an example that happens to many of us, the times when our heart is not in control, and it's our nafs that's making us sit there, feel so agitated, wanting to go and give that person round two, another piece of our mind, and basically satisfy this nafs that just wants what it wants, right? So now you're alone. First thing you should do is de-escalate the emotion, right? Just as a person who comes up to you and he's really angry, really upset, it's not a good idea to tell somebody, oh, you should go pray right now, right? I don't think they're going to listen to you. And just as, think of yourself in that highly agitated state, and someone said, go pray right now, especially if your nafs is overpowering right now. Your nafs doesn't want to hear that. Maybe your heart wants to hear that if the heart had a more stronger grip, right? Or stronger control. But right now, let's assume that our nafs is taking the lead. So, because we're all at different levels in our lives, right? I mean, it's not always that our heart is going to be so powerful, or, so we need to de-escalate the emotion. And tell ourselves, this is where self-compassion comes in, right? Is that, it's okay for us to still feel whole, even though these experiences happen. That this is when you start to detach, your perspective of yourself from the perspective of other people, from the creation. So we depend so much on other people to give us that approval, and so that's why the small arguments sometimes feel like war, because it's not even about what was said. It's about how you felt. How what was said made you feel about yourself. That made your defenses go higher and higher and higher, right? We take that person's judgment or opinions as a direct reflection of who we are. So the beauty of compassion, and I mentioned this briefly in the first class, but I wanted to clarify it a little further, right? Is that I said anything that's help. Oh, sorry, was that mine? Okay. Anything that any time we seek healing, or we seek any goodness in life, or anything that we should strive for, we should always start with involving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the process, because that's the only way we can derive meaning, right? So when we try to practice, when we try to practice the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we try to practice it with who? The creation, right? People around us, our loved ones, because Allah will be that attribute with you, right? If you're merciful towards other people, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be merciful towards you. So in those moments, it's to try to practice those attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala towards yourself. So the beauty of compassion is that you're not attacking yourself as a whole. You're recognizing that this is human. These are human feelings and qualities that you're experiencing. And you're being truthful to your experience. The more we try not to embrace our humanness, the more we're lying to ourselves, right? So this also goes back to being present. When you're present with the situation, you're being truthful, because you're looking at everything the way it should be. And when you have compassion, you know, you're able to see things in a better light. The more on the defense you are, you're not going to be able to see things in a good light, in a truthful light. And this takes the pressure off the ego. And you're able to feel like, you know, when this is self-soothing, this is you trying to give yourself these emotions that you wish that person you got into an argument gave you. So, you know, you say, it's okay that I feel hurt right now. It doesn't mean that I'm, as a whole, you know, flawed or inadequate, or these are things we tell ourselves. It's uncomfortable sometimes to talk about it because, but honestly, these are internal dialogues that happen within us. Experiences happen and we interpret it as what? Something's wrong with me. And it makes the emotion, it even fuels the nafs more, because the nafs can't stand being in this insecure state. So it wants to satisfy its desires. It wants to seek something else that will make it, that painful feeling go away. That's why you have people, why is, you know, drug abuse and all of these things that people, the addictions and negative things, going back to people trying to fill this gap, right? Trying to soothe this emotional agitation. You could learn to soothe it the right way, or it doesn't even have to be drugs. It could be anything, any bad habit that you have, overeating. It could be, what?
Eating chocolate.
Oh, chocolate, yeah, eating chocolate. I mean, I'm talking about like, you know, in non-healthy boundaries, you know. But yeah, so learning how to empower ourselves to give ourselves to soothe ourselves in those moments is huge, and it serves, this serves the purpose of opening your heart. Like I said, because we're not always experiencing open hearts, right? So in those times, we have to get our nafs to go down so that our heart can come up, right? And the best way to get your nafs to calm down in those moments where you're highly agitated is to show it compassion, is to be truthful to your experience, to recognize that you are hurt right now. What you're doing is you're showing mercy, you know, and it's all just kindness. You're being kind to yourself. So your nafs starts to calm down, and then these good qualities that you're feeling are from your heart. Your heart is opening up, and the more you calm the emotions and the ego, the more your heart begins to rise. And this is how then you could maybe tell that person to say, okay, why don't you go make dua right now? Why don't you go turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala right now? Or why don't you go pray, you know? Because we're not always able to jump into that mode right away. So we have to go through that process. And always think, what would you do if a person came to you with that problem? Because we're able to put things in a more realistic perspective. And this is the best way I learn, is like, if someone else came to me, would I be talking to them the way I'm talking to myself right now? Would I be handling it the same way? You know? And sometimes we bully ourselves. Look, you can't even go make dua right now. Look how like, you know, we tell ourselves these things when we can't do the right thing right away. Things aren't black and white. Sometimes we need to take steps, you know, and like sometimes we wait until these experiences happen for us to snap our heart right into action. Your heart is not going to snap and fill you with all this tranquility and peace when you need it most, when you've been neglecting it, you know, the whole time. So just as we take preventative measures with everything else in our life, we need to take preventative measures with our mental, emotional, spiritual health, and try to fuel this heart constantly so it can be better equipped to handle these highly emotional, agitating states that we get into. Yes?
Okay, so like, you know, you're giving an example of like when you're like angry or something, but you also talked about if you like want recognition. At that moment, how can you turn to like of course Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because he recognizes you the most, but like how can you also like value your self-recognition more than like recognition from other people?
Right. Well, you know, in those moments, I mean, reminding yourself that person, no matter how, no matter even if they give you recognition, to remind yourself that it's not lasting, okay? Like you want it so bad, but it's like praise, right? They praise you, feel good temporarily, and then what? You need another dose. It's like, subhanAllah, it's like, even emotion-wise, it's like almost like an addiction kind of, right? We look for, but at the same time, you know, it does go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to how you see your value. You know, if you've defined your value according to what people think of you, then in those moments it's going to be very difficult. But if we've been working on defining our value by how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala views us and correcting our thinking of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by learning about how much He loves us and how the compassion that He has towards us. And also, you know, even in our deen, we're not supposed to be putting ourselves down. You know, we're not supposed to be saying, I am, you know, like there was a man at the time of the Prophet who came to one of the Sahaba and said, you know, I'm nijis, like I'm unclean, I'm impure. And the Sahabi told him, don't say that. You know, we're not supposed to be harsh with ourselves, you know. And maybe in those moments, showing compassion is giving yourself that attention by saying, what do I want right now? What am I looking for that person to give me that I can give myself right now? That attention, that recognition, right? What do I want to be recognized for? Is it really worth it? You know, these are some questions to ask. I don't know if that answered your question.
Thank you.
How much time do I have left?
15 minutes.
15 probably.
10?
10, 15 minutes.
Okay. When you practice these good attributes, your heart opens up because, you know, your heart holds all of these, like, these beautiful qualities, you know, that Allah subhanahu has the potential to experience these beautiful qualities Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put in it. And now I want to end with focusing on our heart just for a few more minutes and then I'll take questions. So we talked about our mind, right? And how that tool can work against us and how we can get it to work for us. Talked about our nafs and how we need to learn to sit with our pain, to find out what this emotion wants from us, and to be explorers, basically. And at the end of it all, it comes down to the most important part of us that we should be feeding, and that's our heart. And if there's anything, any message that I want to get across from this class, was that this orbit, this alignment of all the things that are within us, you know, our mind, our nafs, and our heart. And we said that the only way that we can feel harmony or tranquility, and I know I say this a lot, you guys have probably memorized it, but it's the absolute truth, is that this heart of ours, this spiritual heart, this part of ours that is supposed to be used to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah put in it this light, this longing, you know, it's there. But the more we feed our nafs, the more that heart, like it constricts, you know, that light isn't felt. It's there, but there's layers, you know. And we talked about the layers last week. And so whenever you're going through, you know, experiences or you're learning, you're gaining knowledge, always ask yourself, where is my heart? You know, even when you're praying. One of the biggest mistakes we do when we're praying, and the best way to start fueling your heart is to fuel your heart in prayer. We know how to pray, and knowing how to pray is easy. But teaching our hearts to pray, that's hard. Because when we start prayer, it's like our mind, our thoughts, right? Our mind is constantly telling our heart how it should feel, right? So we're in prayer, we say Allahu Akbar, and you know, we wanted to pray and we have this longing to pray and get close to Allah, but then we're in prayer and your thoughts are going. You didn't say that Fatiha with enough khushu'. Did you really feel that sajda? You know, you're just constantly, you're telling yourself,